Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Marsh India webinar on cyber risks and importance of cyber resilience. We have about 50 participants. The number is increasing by the minute, and we have 3 more minutes to go. So please be patient with us. Good evening once again. Welcome to the Marsh India webinar of cyber risks and importance of cyber resilience. It's 4:59. We have 63 people who've already joined us. So we'll give it a minute or two before we start for the day. Good evening once again. My name is Anup. A very warm welcome to Marsh India's webinar on cyber risks and importance of cyber resilience. I hope you find today very productive. We have a very interesting session and a much more interesting star-studded panel of speakers. It's 5:01. We have close to 100 participants already logged in. So we'll begin right now. So like I said, we have a very interesting agenda today. There are some massive paradigm shifts which are happening in the cyberspace. So there are various different perspectives from which people look at and corporates look at cyber issues and cyber risks. And this landscape is changing in the age of COVID-19 and its use cases also. So we'll have a chat about that. And a very important topic for which we have some global experts joining in today is on cybersecurity and risk. So we'll have a chat on that as well. And the elephant in the room, business interruption, and when things go wrong. And when things go wrong, what are the solutions? What are the risk transfer mechanisms in form of cyber insurance? And it's also role in cyber strategy. So we'll try to cover all of this ground in about 60 minutes time. Feel free to ask questions. A couple of housekeeping items on today's agenda. So please do use the Q&A option in the Zoom app. You will find this thing at the bottom of your screen if you're logging in from a laptop, or you'll find this thing at the bottom of the app if you're logging in from a mobile device. Please don't use, so if you have if you want to speak during the Q&A session, please do raise your hand. And please don't use the chat option to ask questions. Use the Q&A option so that we can respond to your questions in real time. Please wait for your question to be announced as well, because usually what we have seen is there may be a bunch of questions which may be around the same topic, so we can club them together and answer them in one go. Please don't repeat your questions. We are picking up those questions as we conduct this webinar. And my humble request over here is to take the most out of your time and participation today. Please do participate. We are connecting digitally. Please do vote. Please do ask questions. And please do share your opinions and thoughts as well. So moving on. So like I said, we have a star-studded panel. I'm very, very excited to welcome Magda Cherry. She's the head of cyber risk consulting at Marsh Asia. Apart from being a PhD in telecommunication engineering, she's also a certified CIS. And she's one of the top 50 international cybersecurity influencers. If you're there on social media, do check her up, follow her and all. And like I do, and you'll probably gain a lot. We also have Glenn Eaglestone. He's the claims practice leader for us in Asia. And Glenn has been he's based in Singapore, and he's also working with a lot of insurers, a lot of policyholders, seeing a lot of property damage, business interruption claims, and cyber related issues as well. So he will share his own unique perspective on when things do go wrong. And we have Lyndon as well, Lyndon Recco. He's the regional cyber and technical manager in at Marsh FinPro. And he has more than 10 years of experience in doing FinPro business in Australia, Asia, on client engagement, creating customized solutions, and placing difficult cyber policies and technology insurance policies across Asia and Australia. We have Bhishma, who's part of our leadership team over here and is responsible for the cyber media and technology business for us in Asia, for India. And my name is Anup. I have the management responsibility for all the financial lines and professional business, lines business in India, as well as the private equity and M&A space in India. So sit back, relax, do ask questions, please do participate and make the most out of this evening. So next one, please. Over to you, Bhishma.
Thank you, Anup. Welcome all, and I'm extremely happy and extremely proud that we could, do this, and with the kind of support we are getting from our clients and colleagues. So I'll be talking more about. I'll not take much of your time. I'll just I'm here to set the context of what we are talking, why we are talking, and then I will hand it over to my more able colleagues who are coming from different parts of the world to talk about different risks and perspectives. So next slide, please. Yes. So this is why we are all here. We are not physically meeting each other. We are on Zoom calls, on doing these online meetings, virtual meetings, because of the overall pandemic situation. So so when this year started, 2020, I think no one of us had thought of what we will be doing 6 months down the line, that the kind of pandemic risk which it has created. We are all locked up in our houses, but taking everything as it comes, but surviving it, and also keeping up with this black swan event, or as Marsh called it, as a gray rhino event. So Marsh has already came up with a report last year when it talked about pandemic as one of the risks which will affect a lot of organizations across the world. Now, as they say, we are all experts in the hindsight, so we did not take it seriously. But here we are taking it, with a lot of resilience. We have adopted well. Now, in this whole adoption, a lot of organizations have adopted very well to the work from home situation, and are still continue to deliver to their clients. But in this whole process, they have losing out on certain things, which is why the overall cyber risk exposure has increased for the organization, and which is what we are going to talk about, during the presentation. Some of these are, in the whole process of pushing workers to work from home. What we have done is, everyone is working remotely, which means that the organization is increasingly reliant on third-party service providers, who are assisting in this transition. We are all using our work, we are all using our home Wi-Fi's, while there is VPN, but VPNs were not made to process an influx of employees, or influx of large number of employees working from home, which means that there is increased variability and uncertainty, which leading to a different kind of cyber risks altogether. Home routers, Wi-Fi systems, cyber criminals are on the prowl. They are making use of these vulnerabilities. We are seeing a lot of COVID-related, emails, phishing emails, COVID-related different kind of messages coming across, and people falling prey for it. So the only people who are making merry out of this whole crisis situation is our cyber criminals, is what we see. Next slide, please. So what we do, I mean, the classic cyber risk management process is it starts with avoiding or terminating the risk. But believe me when I say, and I'm sure all of you agree with me, that we cannot avoid going digital. We cannot avoid cyber risks, because everyone is going digital, and going digital in a faster pace. So we cannot avoid this risk. What we can do is we can mitigate this risk, or treat with this risk, and this is where your CISOs, your cybersecurity teams are doing an excellent job by making sure that your infrastructure is up to the mark. I would rather say that even our IT personnel are one of those frontliners who are working, extremely hard, overstretched to working hours, but they are making sure that we work from home just fine. So we are trying to avoid the risk, mitigate the risk, and the residual risk then gets transferred via an insurance solution, which is also what we are going to talk about during the presentation in the coming slides. And then after everything, we have to accept or tolerate certain risks. Now, which is something which every organization is aware of that everything cannot be transferred. Now, next slide, please. When you talk about cyber insurance, I think this is a very typical cyber insurance buyer conundrum, that these are the questions which we hear all the time, that uh, any new cyber insurance buyer would like to know how do they assess their cybersecurity maturity, because this is the first question and any underwriter will ask them, that what is your score when it comes to cybersecurity maturity. Then the second question, and again a very big question, is what is the right indemnity limit to purchase? Now, you have decided to buy a cyber insurance policy, but what is the right limit? Whether 100 crores makes sense or 500 crores makes sense? That's again a very big question, which keeps on, uh, you know, uh, which keeps on coming to us via clients. Another important question is, how do I quantify a business interruption? If tomorrow there is a business interruption loss, how do we quantify what kind of losses we have? Now, to answer these questions, these are the typical questions which are raised by our clients. To answer these questions, we have our experts who will be talking about, some of the tools which Marsh has developed in-house to exactly come out with these certain kind of modeling, certain kind of reports, which will ensure that your questions related to these your questions related to these aspects get answered. Now, moving on, before I would invite Magda for the presentation. We have a poll question for our guests. In your opinion, which amongst the following is the most critical concern in light of this situation, the current situation? Is it business interruption? Is it third-party fraud? Is it employee fraud or insider threat? Is it increased cyber attacks due to work from home policies? So please feel free to answer. A few more seconds to go. Great. So no prizes in guessing. It is increased cyber attacks due to work from home policies and phishing attacks. That's what we also thought. That's what our client thinks. Uh, I'll invite Magda to take care of the next few slides. Over to you, Magda.
Thank you very much, Vishma. So, hello everyone, good evening. It is my pleasure today to talk and discuss more about cyber risk management and in general cyber perspectives. So first of all most commonly questions that are addressed by the general public or the IT managers are related to IT problems. So I'll come back to that because it's very important to understand that no matter which tools you have in place, they will not completely eliminate your risks. But let me first tell you why it's important to actually have a strategy when it comes to organization in India in particular. So all over Asia, not only India, has been increasingly interesting target for cyber criminals, and not only technically savvy cyber criminals like black hat hackers or malicious hackers, but in general cyber criminals who are using technology to attack the companies. And the reason is because of an increase of usage of technology and digitalization. So what is happening in India, as an example, we have seen as per the statistics that 66% of Indian organizations paid ransom to retrieve access to data. And I would like you to remember that statistic. Imagine how important that number is, 66%. And this is actually why, again, the cyber risk is getting on top of the list of business risks. And it should not be addressed as an IT problem anymore. We're talking about your organization providing business or doing business using technology for everything. You are using technology to ensure business continuity or business activities with your employees working from home. You are using technology to communicate with your customers, and you are using technology to communicate with your vendors. Therefore, without technology, your business does not exist. And technology brings new risks that are associated to technology, but they do not mean that they are 100% only IT or technical issues. And we will come back to that. But let me bring a little bit more information about cyber criminals. And we have also the perception that cyber criminals are only technically savvy criminals that will attack your networks or your infrastructure to perform cyber attacks. So let me tell you that nowadays, as me and you are working from home, connected via our Wi-Fi, providing or attending webinars, cyber criminals are using technology to perform cyber attacks. And not only they do not need to be technically savvy at all points, but they can actually purchase cybercrime to perform the attacks. So a criminal who is today locked down, for example, and working from home, can go online and can find a way to purchase cybercrime as a service. So what is my point here? Today, cybercrime is becoming a business. That is one. The second point, cyber criminals are not only criminal hackers, they might be as well just criminals using technology. And this brings me to actually the point on increased cyber attacks during COVID-19. And I really like the fact that the poll question has raised this actually really truthful perception that during COVID-19, we have an increased number of cyber attacks. Cyber criminals are using this opportunity to attack your companies, to attack your employees. And how do they do that? Again, the fast pace of our organizations going into adopting new technology to continue performing businesses is raising new cyber risks. And the reason mainly relates to the fact that we have not taken in consideration security from the beginning of our digital transformation. But I will come back to that. I would like you first to actually understand a little bit of use case scenario. Well, I will try to ensure that all your perceptions are completely forgotten after this webinar. So you will not assume that having one technical control will protect your company from cyber risk, because that is not the case. There is a particular way of how you can ensure the security or the cyber security of your company, and that is by having a proper cyber risk management process. But first of all, let's go a little bit more real and see what is happening. we have seen various ransomware attacks. And as I mentioned before, they're going really popular in Asia and across the world. What is really scary is that those cyber attacks that are based on ransomware, which is a malicious software that encrypts or locks the files on your systems, making sure that you do not have access to those files, is actually not only popular, but is as well targeting companies. And this is a very good example. We have as well what has happened to Maersk previously. And Maersk has actually not only had financial losses, but as well had been a victim of business interruption. And again, when you talk about big companies or companies that have security teams or IT teams, you might say, but they had in place some tools, or maybe they didn't implement the right tools. This is a wrong perception. It's not about tools or having your antivirus or having your VPN in place. It's about cyber risk. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about three main pillars. People, and I will tell you this and I will repeat that, a really important pillar of cybersecurity, or your cyber strategy to address cyber risk. Then process, and then at the end, technology that will enforce your employees' awareness and your process to ensure the right mitigation controls for your cyber risk. So most of the time, the attacks happen through actually as simple as phishing attempts or successful phishing attempts. So you have cyber criminals sending emails that are looking very legitimately, and your employees are actually clicking on the link, entering their credentials, and then obviously transferring their credentials to the cyber criminals. This is the very first way, very popular way of how a cyber criminal will get into your system or your network or your company's environment. The second way, which is as well very common, is actually unpatched or unupdated systems within your company. And this is a little bit technical. So the first scenario is very much related to your employees, to people. The second scenario is related to technology and process, where you as an organization, you have actually systems or networks or hardware that have not been updated accordingly to a proper updating or patching schedule, and therefore they present weaknesses that can be exploited by cyber criminals. And this is the very common second scenario. But let me tell you how actually a ransomware attack can happen, because it's very important for you as well, in my opinion, to understand that it's not about technology. So a ransomware first might happen because an attacker will send an infected file or a file that will encrypt your systems within the company. Usually that happens either with a phishing attempt. Basically, a malicious cyber criminal will send an email to your organization, which is very easy to do. That email will contain a file that will actually have the ransomware executable within that email. And then your employee, thinking that is a legitimate file, will click on it, double click on it, and it runs. And what it does, it encrypts the files again on your system. Here in this actually slide, you can see that I'm sharing with you another scenario as well as very interesting, where the attack starts from you as an organization trying to do the right thing and updating your software. But unfortunately, the update has been compromised. And while you are updating your software, you are actually perhaps encrypting your systems with a ransomware. And now you tell me, but we have an antivirus or we have an anti-malware. And I tell you the second step, or the way of how cyber criminals think, is that they know very well that you might have an antivirus. So they have techniques to evade your antivirus. And that is how, no matter what kind of tools you have, you need as well to have the awareness, making sure that actually none of your employees, or at least the maximum number of employees, do not click on random files or run random files or click on links. But I will come back to that. What I want you to remember here is that when you have a ransomware attack, you probably are targeted. When you are targeted, cyber criminals know that you might have an antivirus. So cyber criminals will find a way to evade your antivirus. Then when they evade your antivirus, they can run it. And when they run the ransomware, they will actually encrypt again or lock all the files on your systems, and they will ask you for a ransom, as the name tells you it's coming from, ransomware. And when they ask you for a ransom, it is really important to understand that nowadays the ransomwares are really very advanced. And if you are targeted as an organization, you cannot expect that the security company will decrypt the files. Encryption algorithms are very advanced and they're strong for reason. That's why as well we see newspapers, we see articles about companies and debates talking about how to have backdoors to encryption. Because nowadays encryption is very good, it's very strong. So if your files are encrypted, you find this kind of screen and you find yourself in a situation where not only your business is interrupted, but you actually might have very important financial losses due to the ransom request and as well due to the fact that you cannot perform your business activities. And the whole objective of the cyber criminals is financial gain. So after locking your files or encrypting them, they will ask you for a ransom. And those ransoms have been increasing over the time. They are reaching, even in some cases, millions of dollars, because obviously if the company is not able to perform business activities for a day or 2 or 3, then the business is actually losing a lot of money. So cyber criminals understand that and they play on it. Now, if you think that having a backup will be the way to saving your organization from becoming a victim, I will tell you that nowadays ransomwares are really advanced. And if you're targeted, they will encrypt first the backups and then your live production systems. Again, think from a perspective of cyber criminals. They know what you have. Those are common controls. Those are common tools that a company should have in place. So the antivirus can be evaded. And again, the encryption is actually really strong, so cannot be decrypted easily unless the ransomware is very old. And 3, ransomware can encrypt your backup and therefore it can be very destructive. And you find yourself in a very difficult situation where you need to recover your system, you need to recover access to your data while keeping your business interruption as low as possible or as short as possible. So before going further, because now I told you all the things that are not helping, it's really important to understand how you can mitigate this risk of business interruption due to a cyber attack with a ransomware. So I will tell you a little bit more about that. But before going further, I have a poll question for you. And in light of the current situation, I would like to understand is which of amongst the following is the most popular cyber attack or cyber crime for you that you consider in your environment and after this presentation as well? Poll question?
I've launched the poll.
So very interesting results. We say that phishing attack specifically is what you think is the most popular cyber crime, and then followed by ransomware and data theft. And let me tell you a little bit of what has happened since the COVID-19. And for that, I hope you actually see my screen properly now. So what happened since the COVID-19 is that we have seen a very big increase in cyber attack themed COVID-19. So phishing attacks with COVID-19 information. We have seen malware attack or malicious software attacks themed COVID-19. But since a while, we actually see a decrease, and now there's back the traditional cyber attacks. And those traditional cyber attacks have always had phishing attacks. The phishing attacks are one of the most popular cyber attack, or one of the most popular attack vector into how to get into your company or your organization environment. Then when a cyber criminal gets into your company through your employee, they can do privilege escalation and get access to all your system as admin. But let me go a little bit back. So I told you that cybersecurity is not about having tools, and it is not about having tools, because if your employee actually clicks on an email, no matter what tool you have in place, the person might enter their credentials on that phishing website thinking that is a legitimate one. And they might not even report it to your IT or to the security team in the right time, because they still think that it was a legitimate website. In the meantime, the cyber criminal is having fun getting access to a company's organization systems and all the network as well. So for your information, the average time of a cyber criminal being within the networks of a company in Asia Pacific is actually more than 1 year. Yes, you heard me right. It's more than 400 days. So again, having the right tools is not your solution. The solution is understanding that cybersecurity is about having the right strategy across people, process, and technology. Where you have the 3 pillars, you will be able to address the right questions and have the right answers, not only to your business stakeholders, but as well to anyone who wants or needs to understand what is your current cyber posture. How and what did you do about your cyber risks? So we talked a little bit, and my colleague addressed the point about cyber risk. And I know that we are obviously restricted around time, so I will try to actually go into the practical detail, and so you actually have visual examples. But it's really important to make a clear differentiation between what is a cyber risk and what is a mitigation control or a cyber attack or a threat. So for your business, losing data is a cyber risk. That is a risk that needs to be mitigated by mitigation controls, like, for example, data loss prevention, like a virtual private network or VPN. And then when that risk is mitigated, you still might have residual risk, and basically employees that might still take off your data with a USB key and then or copy it, send it to their personal email. And that is what we call the remaining or residual risk. And it's up to you as the person in charge of cybersecurity to have that clear visibility and list all the cyber risks and then mitigating controls and decide what would you like to do around the residual or remaining risk. Should you avoid it, or terminate it, like my colleague mentioned at the beginning? Should you additionally transfer it with a cyber insurance, or should you just accept it? Or a combination, because you can as well combine those. So, and how do you do that? I gave you the first example about data loss. But I think what is really interesting here as well, what is related to my previous use case, is the cyber attack based on ransomware. So let's take an example. An organization is a victim of a cyber attack with a ransomware. The business is interrupted. Their files and systems are encrypted, and they actually are offline. They cannot proceed with business activities. That is exactly your cyber risk, is a business interruption due to ransomware attack. Now, how long you as an organization are ready to be offline and not provide business to your customers? Is it 1 day? Is it 2 days? Is it a week or a month? That's what will ensure that you understand your risk appetite. When you have that visibility, you will be able to create the right strategy again to mitigate that risk. How do you mitigate it? By identifying controls across people, process, and technology. People, cyber awareness. So people, your employees, do not click on random links or open random files. Process, you ensure that you have not only a proper information security policies in place, but you have as well a process for patching that is followed by your security or IT team. And technology, you might still need an antivirus or an anti-malware as an example. Those are 3 controls that helps you to mitigate a risk of a business interruption due to ransomware attack. Will that completely terminate or reduce the risk? No, it's mitigation. You will have a residual risk. Perhaps the anti-malware or antivirus will not detect that ransomware. Today, every day we have 300,000 of malicious softwares per day that are online available by cyber criminals. So not all antivirus, anti-malware can detect those. And therefore, you might become a victim. So you might have a residual risk that you would like to transfer with the cyber insurance. But in order to do that, you need to very clearly know how you are mitigating the risk and what controls you can implement as much as possible to ensure that you reduce that risk to the maximum. And then, as I mentioned, the cyber insurance is a transfer of your residual risk. So if you just click on every link and open every file, you will still encounter business interruption all the time. So it's really important to have the right strategy. So let me give you a little bit more insights of how to ensure visibility about cyber risks and how that helps you. First of all, as I mentioned, threats are not cyber risks. So if you talk to your business stakeholders or if you discuss with your organization, you need to discuss around data loss, business interruption, data theft, those are your business risks. Then you identify the scenarios of how those business risks can happen. And when those risks are actually clear for you, you can as well prioritize those risks. And you, for example, say, I cannot afford as an organization to have my business go out of business for a week time. That's too long for me. And therefore, I need to implement the controls that will help me to reduce that amount to 1 day or 2 days. And then if there is any remaining risk, I will actually transfer it to the cyber insurance, as I mentioned. And I think here I give you some examples of data loss because your employees are working from home. They might be using unauthorized devices that you are not aware of, and therefore they're storing your corporate data on their own personal devices. You need to understand that risk and you need to have the controls that goes addressing those risks. Now, how do you define, after having the risk, you understand your scenarios, you know how those risks can happen, you need to understand how much they can cost to your business. The example of business interruption is just one example, but that actually is a factor that will help you calculate properly of how much your business might lose if you are a victim of a cyber attack, because it's all about financial losses. So if your business is a victim of cyber attack, you might have business interruption, you might lose clients, you might actually need forensic investigation, you might need ransomware costs. The cyber criminals, for example, want a ransom of 1 million. You might actually have as well other factors that you need to calculate. And those are actually all the support as well that we provide as Marge Advisory. But again, it's all about coming down to you as an organization understanding cybersecurity is not a tool. It's ensuring that you understand your weaknesses across people, process, and technology, that you identify your risks, prioritize your scenarios, and try to mitigate them depending on how much financial loss you're ready to take. But let's go a little bit further with my colleague, actually, details about business interruption. And before I give him this opportunity, this is another question for you. So which element on standard cyber business interruption cover would generally lead to the largest loss? What do you think? And I can see that majority of the responses are cost of mitigating potential losses. And then we see continuing normal operating expenses, loss of gross profit. I think definitely they are all valid, but let me actually hand over to my colleague Glenn. And he, I'm sure, will give you a lot of insights that you did not think about previously about. Glenn, over to you.
Thank you very much. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. So many of you may not know a lot about business interruption from a cyber perspective. So what I thought I'd do today is maybe start with an area that maybe you're more familiar with. So a lot of people understand more about business interruption from a property insurance perspective. So what we'll do is we'll start by discussing that, and then maybe think about how that will then convert to cyber business interruption insurance, thinking about what's similar and maybe what's a little bit different. So starting with terminology, you may see on a lot of policies, either it's called business interruption, consequential loss, or time element. Now, in reality, they all mean the same thing. What you might find is depending on the type of policy, depending on the geographical location you're based in, that will dictate the terminology used. But they really all mean the same thing. Now, on a property policy, you've generally got two core sections. So section 1, the property damage insurance policy, that's designed to protect your assets. So that's the assets of the business. It's really the balance sheet of the business. Section 2 would be for business interruption insurance. So the idea is that it protects the income or the profit and loss account of the business. So when combined, assets and income are both protected. That is generally your overall property insurance policy, PD and BI. Now, underpinning the whole of the BI policy is that it's a policy of indemnity. The purpose of doing it is to protect the insured, to make sure they get put back in the same financial position they would have been in had the damage not been suffered in the first place. That underpins all business interruption insurance. The same goes for cyber business interruption insurance. So next slide, please, Magda. What we see here is a typical indemnity clause or indemnity provision. So you will see this in all policies. And this can be summarized in the very simple 3-step process that you see on the right, that for every legitimate business interruption claim, there must be a peril that is not excluded in the policy. There must be insured damage, i.e. damage that is not excluded in the policy. And ultimately that results in business interruption. So this 3-step process is a very useful way of thinking about business interruption. If you're ever thinking about whether something's covered or not, typically an insured peril causing insured damage resulting in business interruption. If you have those 3 steps in that order, generally you'll be able to get a legitimate business interruption claim over the line. Similar kind of steps apply to cyber insurance policies as well. Next slide, please. So what I thought I'd discuss very briefly is the way that we would go about calculating business interruption loss from a property perspective, and then we can translate that into cyber again, because it's very similar. Generally, for a gross profit cover, there are three main elements. So there's the loss of gross profit due to a reduction in turnover. There's the loss of gross profit due to an increase in cost of working. And then thirdly, there's your fixed cost savings, which is a negative that's deducted from the other two. By far the most difficult to calculate would be a reduction in turnover. So the way we'd go about that is by thinking about exactly what is the reduction in turnover. We then determine the rate of gross profit, and then we just simply apply that rate of gross profit to the reduction in turnover. Nice and simple. If we pick out one segment of that, the determination of the reduction in turnover, fairly straightforward of how to calculate it. We just need to calculate the adjusted standard turnover, then deduct our actual to give us the reduction. However, that masks the complexities in actually calculating your adjusted standard turnover. What we have to do is predict how the business would have performed during the period. So we have to predict all the different variants that might have happened had the insured damage not occurred. And again, the same process needs to be followed from a cyber perspective. Yes, the triggers will be completely different. There may be very many differences between your property policy and your cyber. But at the end of the day, the processes you have to follow from a BI perspective are actually quite similar. And there is a consistent message that we have seen from a property perspective, is that the average business interruption loss now significantly exceeds the property damage. It didn't used to be. Previously, property damage was always the largest component, but in recent years, BI has overtaken it considerably, which is surprising sometimes when you think all organizations will always buy property damage cover, but some actually still don't buy business interruption, even though that is the larger risk. Thanks, Magda. Next slide, please. So what we'll do is we'll think about it from a cyber perspective now. So what are the differences? Well, firstly, we'll think about timing. So from a timing perspective, when you're looking at a property policy, typically you're talking months, sometimes even years for the indemnity period, while we're actually assessing what's happened and getting the business recovered, maybe getting the building repaired after an earthquake or a fire, whatever it might be. But from a cyber perspective, it's much more short term. Sometimes you're only talking hours or days. In the extreme, it might be weeks, but it's a significantly shorter period. Now, one other difference is the experience that we've had in business interruption in this particular sector. We've had business interruption in the property sector for 50 odd years. There's a lot of experience. There's a lot of knowledge as to exactly how the claims are going to be put together. There's a lot of precedent out there, but cyber's still new. It's being developed. So the policies we're seeing are still changing. What we see here is an example of cover. And so it's just taken from a random policy. So you can see that there's the lost net profit that would have been earned during the recovery period before taxes and income. And then you add to that continuing normal expenses and payroll expenses that have been incurred. Now there's two ways of calculating business interruption typically. One way is called the difference basis. It's also known as the top-down approach. It's revenue less variable costs. The other way of calculating gross profit is the additions basis, net profit plus continuing fixed costs. Now, these cyber policies tend to follow the additions basis. That is also a little bit of a difference from the property policies. What we're finding with property policies is they started also with the additions basis, but over time it's developed, it's changed. It's much easier to calculate a loss based on revenue less variable costs. So therefore, we always try and promote the difference basis. From a cyber perspective, because it's a new product, we're tending to go with the additions basis still, as you've seen here. So next slide, please, Magda. So if you were to ask me how would I go about actually calculating what business interruption coverage would be required, the methodology we'd use is really scenario modeling. So we'd work with IT experts, Magda and Lyndon and some of the other colleagues that we have in the team, thinking about what the risks could be within the organization from a cyber perspective. And then what we would do is then model that from a BI perspective. Working with the clients, we would think about the period of time the business is likely to be interrupted. As I say, that's normally much shorter than standard, but it can vary depending on the industry you're in and the particular issue that you're encountering. The extent to which the business will be affected. Is it one subsidiary? Is it one division? Is it one location? Or is it the overall business that will be completely disabled in the event of an attack? Are there mitigation measures that could be adopted? Workaround strategies? As you've heard from Magda, quite often there aren't any. You're stuck. Doesn't matter what processes you have in place. It's very difficult to work around these strategies. And then finally, what we'll do is collate a whole load of financial data to actually estimate what that loss of gross profit might be arising from that insured cyber event. What that will do is enable us to actually form a picture of the level of cover that's required. Now, you might find that the capacity within the insurance market is not enough to actually address that maximum foreseeable loss from a cyber perspective. So you do need to think about other alternative risk management supplements, the kinds of things that Magda was just talking about, things that you have to have in place to make sure that overall your business can survive this. I did look at the last 4 risk scenarios that we actually went through, risk assessments, and it's surprising to see that 2 out of those last 4, the business interruption component of the MFL, the maximum foreseeable loss, related to business interruption. So 95% was business interruption, only 5% was actually attributable to the other costs that are critically important to be covered. Okay, thank you, Magda. So before I pass on to Lyndon, we have another poll question. So what, according to you, is the top reason organizations are purchasing cyber insurance? So is it precautionary measure? Is it an increased priority on cyber security? Is it new data protection regulations? Or is it a client requirement? Well, that looks like a strong winner for an increased priority on cyber security. So yeah. To discuss more about cyber insurance, I will now pass you over to my colleague, Lyndon.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, look, that's an interesting result. And I think it's one that's growing in tandem with an increase in the take-up rate of cyber insurance as well. So in this section, we're going to talk about transferring the residual risk that you might have, cyber risks, to an insurance contract, or more specifically to a cyber insurance contract. So in the first slide, we have an overview, a generalized overview of quite a standard cyber policy. It's evolved quite rapidly over the last few years, cyber insurance. You know, what was once traditionally just a third-party liability policy has now morphed and evolved to meet the risk of the ever-changing cyber threat landscape. And now you'll see a lot of these insuring clauses are around the breach management and response services that the policy provides. But a big insuring clause is always network interruption, business interruption. When I'm speaking to clients, it's always the failure of systems and not being able to actually operate their businesses due to a cyber attack. Extortion is another one, and it's obviously on the increase in Asia specifically. The fourth one there we've got is data restoration and network restoration. So the costs associated with rectifying data, reconstituting data, and rectifying networks and systems, they're all very, very costly aspects to this policy and to a cyber event. The liability aspects are all there. So privacy liability. So if you get sued or an action is taken against you for losing personally identifiable information or personal health information or non-public sensitive corporate information of your clients, and actions taken against you, then there'll be the liabilities associated with that. So the settlements and the defense costs will be covered. The network security liability is another key point. If you do pass a virus from your systems, you've been infected, and it's what they call conduit liability as well. And it's passed to a third party, and then they sue you because it was able to be traced that they actually were affected by this virus. Then there's also defense costs and settlement costs associated with that. And another big focal point now, is specifically with the GDPR. We're seeing a lot of countries in Asia starting to adopt similar sorts of regulatory fines and penalties, which are going to be increased over the next few years in Asia. We're going to see an adoption of a uniformity of these sort of laws. So the fines and penalties associated with in the event of a data breach. If you have a cyber data breach and they impose a fine and penalty, the cyber insurance policy will often reimburse you for the costs associated. And probably the critical point that I like to try and impress on people is the incident response services. And like we talked about before, it's the first party costs that are really, really expensive. And I like to refer to this as cyber insurance as a service. It's not like a traditional insurance policy. It's quite unique in the way that it's actually set up. So when you actually do purchase a cyber policy, there will be a suite of vendors. And looking at the incident response services there on the slide, all these will be engaged, sometimes pre-engaged, across IT forensics, incident response manager. So someone to help you guide you through what to actually do in the event of a cyber attack. And these services are usually available 24/7. It's like a toll-free number. Some insurers have apps so that you can register a cyber breach on. But engagement of IT forensics, public relations firms, notification centers. If you're in a country that has notification laws and requirements, you have to do credit monitoring. You have to notify every individual. You have to email individual affected. It can be quite a costly venture. Another big one is legal counsel. Getting access to a legal counsel, especially if you have a business operation that is in many countries around the world where the regulatory environment can differ from country to country. Getting access to legal counsel, if data's breached in one of those countries and they do have a GDPR like law, is quite valuable and a very positive thing to have in this sort of policy. So ransomware is another one, negotiations, but also payments of cryptocurrencies. And we'll just go to the next slide if we can there. So there's a lot of coverages, but it doesn't cover every aspect and peril that you might actually receive from a cyber attack. Bodily injury and property damage, this is for the intangible assets. So bodily injury and property damage is a common exclusion you'll see in a cyber policy. Critical infrastructure as well. So any infrastructure under your control is usually covered, but anything outside of your control is not generally covered. And the reason for that is an accumulation of losses that potentially could happen if a telco went down or an energy provider went down. That's just not sustainable for an insurance product. Errors and omissions, or it's also known as professional indemnity insurance. So claims resulting in the provision of your professional services won't be covered. War exclusion, it's in most policies. However, there is a critical right back for cyber terrorism, or non-physical cyber terrorism. And on the next slide, so really we've been talking about a lot of the threats and the risks that are out there, and it's really important to understand holistically how you can be affected. So when we look at the potential loss scenarios on the screen right now, what are the loss drivers that your company faces? Is it just the operational expenses? Is it the cost to restore data, remove ransomware and the payments of that specific ransomware, forensics counsel's fees, additional staff and training? Is it more on the liability side of things? Is it litigation costs, defense costs? Is it regulatory? We touched on that. It depends on the laws where your companies reside, but it also depends on their footprint. And then there's reputational loss. So things like PR consultant engagement. And a lot of the reputational losses may or may not be covered. It does depend on the policy, but some aspects of that actually aren't 100% insurable. And then there's obviously loss of revenue. We've touched on business interruption throughout this presentation, and that is a key risk. That's one of the biggest risks that I do hear from clients is business interruption, and that's very consistent from clients. So as you can see, we've overlapped this cyber insurance policy insuring clauses underneath these key loss drivers, the estimated loss drivers. And the basis for the coverage, as you can see, we have a good, medium, and it's good, medium, and difficult to claim. So when you do look at those, the cyber policy does cover off on a lot of those different loss drivers, but it won't cover everything in there. So the reputational damage is one of the more difficult ones to do because it's very difficult to underwrite such a risk. So identifying the exposures and the keys to program alignment. It's a changing world in the insurance world. While the cyber policy is quite broad in its cover, the insurance market generally is actually changing quite significantly. And it's important to really understand your suite of insurance policies. And especially when you look at traditional property and casualty lines, which do focus on the physical events. But cyber now is so integrated within our business and our personal lives. We really need to look to transfer some of that cyber risk to a standalone insurance contract. But now, in the last 12 months or so, we're seeing insurers really take a stance on where they'll provide cover, and this is commonly called silent cyber exposure. And silent cyber exposure came out of the NotPetya attacks in 2017. NotPetya, the insurance industry has calculated that it's cost them over $3 billion in losses. And 90% of those losses were not covered by cyber insurance policies. It was just the remainder that was. So essentially all these traditional insurance policies were never effectively underwritten, or they weren't effectively created for cyber perils and cyber risks. So now we're seeing insurers, global insurance market and Lloyd's of London specifically imposing affirmative or non-affirmative cover on traditional lines of insurance policies to really create to create further demarcation to where they will cover something or they won't cover something. And it is a difficult transition period right now in the insurance market to work this out. We do see solutions. There are things like gap cover that we actually do provide, and specific industries are very, very interested in this sort of gap cover, which is like an exclusion buyback. But that's actually becoming a fairly effective solution for a lot of clients. And before I hand back over to Magda, when we do talk about insurance, it shouldn't be looked upon as being a replacement of your cyber risk mitigation strategies, but it should be looked upon as being a key part of your cyber risk mitigation strategies. And back to you, Magda.
Thank you very much, Lyndon, for your presentation. Always very interesting to see how those inclusion work. So before going into the takeaway, again, if we're talking about cybersecurity and you as an organization trying to understand your cyber strategy, what should you prioritize? So you can't prioritize a solution or a tool or a process or an awareness unless you know and you understand what is important for your company. As an example, your organization has an e-commerce website. This e-commerce website is generating 1 million every hour. If that website is down, your business loses money, and therefore you need to ensure that it's up all the time. How do you do that? With the controls across your, again, people, process, and technology. Servers up, you ensure that you have the right process to update all the infrastructure, all the hardware. You ensure that your employees are aware about what needs to be done, that they don't give up their passwords. But if you don't have the visibility about what you want to protect, what are the scenarios that might lead to business interruption, I can't tell you, you need to prioritize this versus this. It doesn't work that way. The only change that we see very, very much that is important is that because nowadays you're working out of your perimeter, you're not within the company's offices, you might consider a data-centric approach. What's most important for you, you have data that's valuable for your company, that represents a digital asset. You need to protect that data from insider threat. Your employees, like, you know, stealing the data or cyber criminals stealing the data. There are solutions that help with that. Data loss prevention is an example. So if you focus on a data-centric, defense in depth, various controls at various levels, and then you monitor and you have a clear understanding of what is your residual risk, then eventually you're on the right path. But today, again, the objective is not to give you an answer of this is a cyber strategy, you apply it from A to B. You need to understand your risks, and your risks depend on your business. What's the most important for you? Data loss, because you're a financial institution and have a lot of personal information and financial information, credit card numbers, or is it business interruption that is very important for you because you are a manufacturer and you cannot just go out with your factory down for a week? So having that is the first step. You have that visibility. Then you can eventually build upon with a cyber plan. The cyber plan will identify what are the controls across all the cyber risks, controls related to people, process, and technology that will reduce the risk. And therefore, if, let's take an example, your employee clicks on a file and that infects a laptop, you actually get an alert. You are able to re-image that laptop within 24 hours. There are several controls, one after the other, that will reduce your risk, but you need to have that visibility. And that visibility is actually helping as well to align your organization's cyber plan with your risk appetite. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you are fine with 1 month of business interruption, then you will have different controls. If your business is critical and as a financial institution, you need to be online 24/7. Your risk appetite is not the same, meaning that you will not accept being offline for 1 week versus 1 day, for example, or 1 hour. So that clarity is extremely important for you and for your business stakeholders, including the board, if you are exchanging with them. And of course, that means that you have data that will help you to identify those risks and help you prioritize the initiatives, the controls, and then also understand how much you're happy to invest in mitigation and how much you will transfer with the cyber insurance. So this is what you need to do next week, next few months, and next half a year. You need first to have very clear understanding that we're not talking about an IT problem. We're talking about cyber risks. What is your business doing? What are the cyber risk scenarios identified? What might lead the business to data loss, business interruption, data theft, governance failures, etc. The risks need to be identified by you. Then you have your assets that are very important. You understand the threats, and you find, again, as I mentioned, I'm repeating, controls across people, process, and technology. And then you need to monitor whatever you have implemented, while at the same time, you can transfer the residual with cyber insurance. So within 6 months, you need to have that clarity. You need to have a strategy. You need to have a roadmap. And cybersecurity is not a one-time journey. You will need to keep going and ensuring that you have monitoring and corrective actions, because no matter how big is the company, no matter how big is your cybersecurity team, if you're targeted, they find a way because there's no 100% security. So again, defense in depth, clear understanding that it's not if, but when, and having really the right approach. And this is what we help about. So just a very quick note. We at Marsh Advisory not only identify the risk, because that's where you start your journey, but help you with how to treat or transfer the risk. Treat is with mitigating controls, transfer with cyber insurance. And then as an example of termination is if you consider that using a certain technology with open new cyber risk, you don't use it. And that's an easy way of terminating a risk. So have always that particular approach, or I would say strategy in your mind, clarity. It's about understanding of how you can minimize. And those understanding do not come overnight. So slowly you build the scenarios, you understand your current situation, what are your risks, what are your exposures, and how you can actually over time reduce them. So this is for today. I hope that we answered most of your questions. I can see that we have additional questions coming, and this is the Q&A session. So please keep coming, keep asking more.
Great. Thank you, Magda, and thank you all our audiences for a very patient hearing. There have been a lot of questions which have been asked, and some of these questions, in fact, most of these questions have already been answered by our panel, mostly Magda, because those were directed to her. But I would still like to take, a couple of questions which have been repeated for the overall benefit of our audience. So one theme which is recurring, Magda, and my question will be to you is, how secure is the VPN network? Because people have asked those questions. We all think that once we are on VPN, I think that will take care of all our issues. What do you think? What are your views? How secure is VPN? So that's the question. Yeah.
A VPN is a tool that encrypts data. So that means that when I communicate with you, the communication is encrypted, and a cyber criminal cannot read what I am sending to you. By that definition, you should understand that it doesn't do by magic protect all the data or protect all the assets. It just actually addresses one particular risk and helps one control. In general, any technology, any tool, any software that we are using nowadays has technological or technical weaknesses. And those are vulnerabilities that are published by the vendors every day. In average, we have 17,000 new vulnerabilities per day. No matter what tools you're using, no matter which brands, they will have weaknesses, and that's why it's important to patch or update them accordingly on a very regular basis. I hope this answered the question. So the answer in short is no, it doesn't solve everything by magic.
So it's not a magic wand, but yes, it's a part of the overall security
yes.
process. So good. We would also request, if someone wants to ask the question, they can raise hand, we can unmute them. But in the meantime, there was another question on ransomware, Magda. So, we have all heard about a large IT company being hit by a ransomware attack, and a large hotel chain hit by a ransomware attack. So what are your views? What should an organization do in one, to avoid such cases, and also if there is a ransomware attack, what are the immediate action? If you can quickly touch upon that.
Sure, and I definitely think that ransomware is the nightmare for every organization. It can lead to very long business interruption. But I do think that if a company has a proper defense in depth, at least they would be able to detect the first suspicious activity. Because as I mentioned, the most sophisticated one, first of all, will encrypt the backup. So you already see some, suspicious activities, and if you're monitoring as a company, which you should do, you should be able to at least detect something. But then again, it's about having controls at each step. Every time when there is something that is happening within your network, within your system, that shouldn't be happening, or what we call behavioral analysis tools, those can help you to monitor and detect that. Some of the anti-malware are very effective, but some of the antivirus are also not able to detect the malware in general, and especially the ransomware, because they are based on signature. What does it mean? You have an antivirus, you have a database, and they compare with the database. So as I mentioned during the presentation, we have 300,000 new malware approximately per day. So that database is not updated every second, and therefore the antivirus cannot detect the ransomware or the new malware. So you need different tools, and some of those tools are behavior analysis. So if they detect that something is happening within your laptop or within your system server that's unusual, they will stop it. And that actually helps a lot. But again, no magic tools. So this is one of the controls. Defense in depth. So the first, you need to be very careful removing the local admins of the laptops of the employees, awareness for the employees, then antivirus, anti-malware, then monitoring, behavioral analysis, and we go up and down into the depth until you need to be able to detect something unusual within your system at some point.
Thank you, Magda. That's quite helpful. We are already, overshot our time by 12, 13 minutes. Just maybe a couple of more questions we will take. So one of the question is on cyber insurance policy, which is, on additional insured. Can we agree on additional insured status on cyber insurance policy? I would like to give you the India, view on this, Indian insurers' view on this, and I will also invite Lyndon to give what views insurers have in the region. So in India, it's difficult to get a cyber additional insured. One, because cyber insurance policy is mostly for your first party losses. It's for your expenses which you do after post a cyber event, your business interruption losses. So it's mostly for first party. So there is additional insured does not make any sense. Even for data liabilities and other kind of losses, it's for the individuals who have lost their data. So it's difficult. It's not impossible. It's taken it by case-to-case basis by the insurers. So that's something which we have seen with the Indian insurers. Lyndon, quickly, if you can tell us about what's happening in the region.
Yeah, look, I'm in full agreement. I've had this request a couple of times, but it rarely get a policy placed on this basis. I think it's too broad, and there's too many threat vectors, and the nature of the data depends on the sensitivity of the data. It's insurers just aren't interested in doing it. And I mean, fundamentally, really you got to look at it as you can't outsource cyber liability. It's very, very difficult. It depends on what sort of data you are handling, but yeah, insurers aren't keen on adding additional insureds.
Sure, same view. Another question on cyber insurance, and please let your questions come in. We will answer each and every questions individually to all of you. Since the time is short, we'll just take one more question, and then we'll wrap this up. There's one more question, Lyndon. I would direct it to you. Do third-party data is covered under cyber insurance policy? The third-party data which is stored on your client's servers.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the other question. Like I said, you can't outsource that liability. Some of the famous hacks we've had, be it an airline or a hotel chain, I think potentially it was a third party that was actually processing that data or holding that data that had the attack. But the regulators, and the people that lose that third party data won't go after whoever the third party that client engages to process that data. They'll always go back to the first party. So the name brand, the company that actually is taking their data, whether it might be online or through other methods. So yeah, it's a difficult question, but yeah, you can't really do that on a contractual basis. Third party law.
So just as the closing remark, I would like to say that your cyber insurance policy is a highly customizable policy, and it's not straitjacketed as your other traditional insurance policies. So we can bring in a lot of customization with the insurers. The policy wordings are quite flexible, and that's why you would need help of some experts to ensure that all the risks which you foresee, all the exposures which you foresee, can be then translated into a proper insurance policy. It can be underwritten by the insurer well. So on that note, I would like to thank each one of our participants, the audience. You have been very patient. Thank you for taking out time. Thank you for all our panelists, expert panelists. Again, it was a great session, is what I would like to believe. And we will try and answer all the remaining questions which we have. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks for your attendance.